all not, we are all equal, but we all have some disability in one way or the other. And within the African context, there are disability people amongst us who have rights and should be enjoyed. Thus, we've seen reason to undertake this program, particularly when the protocol is not widely ratified by member states. So today with us, we also have two esteemed people from the Center for Human Rights. And first, I want to introduce Professor Franz, who doubles as the director for the Center for Human Rights and has vast research in human rights protection, particularly within the African human rights system. He's also author of many books, particularly the International Human Rights Law in Africa. And he is also the lead for the African Human Rights Journal. Prof. Franz Leone is also, can you all hear me, please? Professor Franz Leone is also a visiting professor in many universities, particularly on African human rights systems as well. And currently he doubles as the deputy chairperson of the Global Campus, which is housing, okay, there we have him, which is also housing about 7 universities globally in relation to human rights and democracy. So, to all of you, this is Prof. Franz Leone, and you will hear more of him within the session. Thank you very much, and please note that in the course of it, if you have questions or you have any remarks, kindly wait when the speakers are through. Kindly note that down and raise it up when the speakers are through speaking. Thank you very much, and I wish you an insightful engagement. Prof. Franz Leone, do you have some few words for us?
Yes, thank you. I was just waiting for the cue. Thank you so much for the generous introduction. By way of introduction, just to say the Center for Human Rights, obviously, as most of you would know, has 2 aspects to it. On the one hand, we are an academic department here at the Center for Human Rights, which is a department within the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria. But on the other hand, we are really an NGO with observer status with the African Commission, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and we advocate generally for the better realization of human rights in Africa. So today's event really brings together the 2 strands of the center. So as you heard from the introduction, on the one hand, we have our students on the master's program in human rights and democratization in Africa. As part of their program, the current crop of students are engaged in advocacy projects, real-life advocacy projects, and this project then is to advocate for the more pervasive ratification of the protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So that brings in the academic aspect, but the work takes place within the framework of the center as an NGO. We have a number of units that advocate for the rights of particularly vulnerable groups or groups rendered vulnerable in Africa. One of those units is the unit on the rights of persons with disabilities. And this unit has been engaging more broadly in a campaign over the course of the year for the improved ratification of the protocol. So we bring together these strands. We thank everyone who is on this Zoom call. We appreciate your presence here. I think what we try to do today is to celebrate the 3 countries that have already ratified, just to mention them. I mean, from the outset, Mali, Kenya, and Rwanda. And I think we also acknowledge that ratification is important, but it is certainly not the be and end all of the process of better human rights protection. We think it is an important starting point. Today we also target states that have signed but perhaps not ratified the protocol up to this point. I hope there's no interruption. There was just a power outage here briefly. So the states that are here, I think there are national human rights institutions, civil society. Clearly, to get states to ratify is a cumulative effort that involves certainly all role players to contribute to that effort. I just want to remind us that there are 4 protocols, substantive protocols that have been adopted to the African Charter. The one is the Maputo Protocol. Now that has been ratified by 42 states and it has been in force for quite a number of years. The second is the Protocol on Older Persons, 2016. The third is this protocol, the Protocol on the rights of persons with disabilities. And then the last is a very recently adopted protocol to the African Charter on social assistance, which was just adopted in February this year by the AU Assembly. Now, each of these protocols require 15 ratifications for their entry into force. And it is certainly of concern to us that after a number of years for this protocol, the Protocol on the rights of persons with disabilities, there are only 3 ratifications that have been deposited with the AU according to the records. So today is just an effort to get that ball rolling faster in the acknowledgement that ratification is not the end result. It's a necessary first step in many respects. We will also keep on engaging with states that have ratified to also ensure the effective domestication and contribute to that process. So we hope that the sessions today would be informative to those of us attending. And if you are in any position where you can exert influence, we hope that the information gained, the insights, well, the information that you receive, the insights gained will enable you to join us as a center with many other partners on this campaign to ensure the entry into force of this protocol, perhaps before the end of the year. So that's a very high threshold to get a number of states on board in the next 6 months or so. So thank you very much to all our resource persons, everyone attending, thanks to the students and to the people at the unit within the center who have been responsible for organizing this event. We really look forward to your engagement and future action plan that may emanate from this meeting. Thank you so much. Back to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Professor Franz, for that insightful introduction. For those of you just joining, welcome to today's session. You're welcome to the first webinar session of the need for the ratification of the African Disabilities Rights Protocol. My name is Olabisi Olatubosun. And I would like to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Wilson Macharia. Mr. Wilson Macharia is a project officer here at the Disability Rights Clinic at the Center for Human Rights. And he's also an alumnus of the Human Rights and Democratization Program in Africa. Mr. Wilson, are you here?
Yes, I am here. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. There was a brief power outage where I am. I hope it doesn't affect the bandwidth. But thank you everyone for joining us. As rightly said by Olabisi, my name is Wilson Macharia. I am a project officer with the Disability Rights Unit of the Center for Human Rights, and also proud to be an alumni of the Human Rights and Democratization Program, which are students who organize this webinar are part of. This is a campaign that we are running, as Prof. Franz has mentioned, under the Center for Human Rights, for 4 protocols at this stage. Our main focus with in the Disability Rights Unit is the Africa Disability Rights Protocol, which we are conversing about today. And we have made some strides as far as that is concerned. At the moment, we shall get to share a bit of what we have done as we proceed with the webinar. And one of the advocacy tools that we have developed is actually a roadmap that shows the steps that states should take to sign, ratify, or accede to the Africa Disability Protocol and all other protocols within the AU system. So we hope that the information that we get today shall be helpful towards the next steps, and that it will be an initiation of a collaborative effort between the Center for Human Rights here and also yourselves as individuals and also as organizations and institutions in different states. So before getting into the gist of the presentations today, because we have a great panel lined up for you, as a person with a disability myself, with a lived experience of being visual impairment, I always am looking forward to the time when the Africa Disability Rights Protocol comes into force, because there are salient issues that have been advanced by the protocol, most of which are not prominent on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which most African parties, African states have ratified. And then over and above that, as someone from Kenya, I am very proud to come from a country that has so far acceded to the Africa Disability Rights Protocol, and I'm sure this is something that is shared by other persons with disabilities in Mali and Rwanda. But the aspirations and the promises that are enshrined in this instrument cannot come into force. We cannot enjoy them until your states, other states, come and ratify the protocol in order for us to achieve at least the minimum number, which is 15. So we hope that the conversations that we have today shall advance this conversation, and perhaps on the 3rd of December, which is International Disability Day, we shall be celebrating the coming into force of the Africa Disability Protocol. It might be a long call, but I think it's better to hope that we get that to that point. Otherwise, thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope that you enjoy the session. Thank you, Olabisi.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we move forward to the fourth session, which is, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we move forward to the next session. So I call on Enoch to give a brief introduction of the next speaker.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, once again, good morning, everyone. My name is Enoch Shiburu. I'm also a master's candidate here at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. I would like to thank all the participants and the panelists for making the time to join us this morning to discuss this important issue. We are going to hear from our next panelist about the need for ratification of the African Disability Protocol, his experience about the ratification of the protocol, and as to why the African Disability Protocol is an essential companion to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and to actually protect the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. I think change cannot actually happen without working collaboratively as an effective mechanism for increasing the impact of our ratification campaigns. And it's only by working together we can achieve the necessary 50 ratifications necessary to bring the protocol into force. So I hope we will hear also about how we can work collaboratively to achieve our shared objective of bringing the protocol to force. Now, to do justice to the conversation, let me introduce you to our very first speaker, Mr. Danyacho Wakeni. Dak is a seasoned lawyer from Ethiopia who has close to 2 decades of experience working as an advocate, educator, and researcher on disability rights in Africa. He holds a LLB degree from Addis Ababa University and his Masters of Philosophy from Stellenbosch University, and currently is a doctoral candidate at the Institute for International and Comparative Law in Africa, here based in University of Pretoria, with a research focus on violence on persons with disabilities in Africa. He also served as regional director for African Disability Alliance Regional Office in Addis. Danyacho is also founding member in many civil society organizations in Ethiopia and Africa, such as Ethiopian Lawyers with Disabilities Association and the African with Disabilities Network. He has also extensively published on disability rights in Africa. So, thank you again for gracing our occasion. I will now leave the floor to you to address the participants.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jack.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, friends, colleagues. Greetings from Addis Ababa, where the Africa Disability Protocol was adopted in 2018, January 2018. I'm pleased to be part of this panel, and I would like to recognize the effort, the concerted, consistent effort that's being made by the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, to promote the Africa Disability Protocol, as well as lobby for its ratification, fast-track ratification. Since the adoption of the protocol in 2018, this is the 4th or 5th panel that I've been part of every year, organized by the Center for Human Rights, bringing together various stakeholders, disability rights advocates, governments, state representatives themselves, etc. So there have been diverse and coordinated efforts by the center to ensure that this protocol enters into force. And I refer to the protocol sometimes as our protocol, as you will hear me during my presentation, because I'm a person with disability myself. I'm a polio survivor, born and raised in Ethiopia. So I'm talking about this issue of what the Africa Disability Protocol is all about and why our states should ratify, not just as an expert on disability rights, as someone who has been working on this topic for several years, but because it's also personal to me as a person with disability. Having said that, if I may turn off the video in the interest of the internet connection so that we would have a smooth flow of the presentation, that would be good. I hope I'm permitted to do that. And can you see the presentation, Mr. Moderator? Could you kindly confirm that you can see the slide?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the topic I have chosen would be appropriate for this presentation is fast-tracking ratification of our Africa Disability Protocol and why African states should ratify the protocol, its current status, limitations, and prospects. So in this presentation, I'll talk about the current status of how many signatures we have, which has already been alluded to during the introductions of this meeting, also mentioned by Professor Leone. So I'll briefly talk about the current status of ADP signatures, ratifications, and accessions by AU member states. And then I'll address the expected roles of various stakeholders in fast-tracking ratification of the protocol. Who are these stakeholders and what do we expect? What should we expect from these stakeholders, including ourselves, including the participants in this meeting? And then I'll address limitations or challenges observed since the protocol's adoption in January 2018. What are the limitations that have held the entry into force of this protocol back? What are the limitations that have delayed it? And what limitations can we also anticipate once this protocol enters into force? I think it's good to address those points so that we can make preparations in terms of writing academic articles, academic interventions, as well as do research to ensure that once the protocol has entered into force, this challenge could be preempted and would not be cited as pretexts for its lack of domestication or implementation, etc. So it's good to address possible limitations that we might anticipate. And then I'll also talk about the prospects of the protocol, what we should be excited about, what should keep us going for fast-tracking the ratification of this protocol, and why it is fundamental, why it is an important regional instrument of human rights. So I'll talk about these points as quickly as possible in the interest of time. So in terms of current status, signatures, ratifications of the ADP, one thing that we need to underline first and foremost before we even begin talking about the current status of signatures and accessions is this essential question of why did we need an Africa-specific disability rights treaty in the first place? What is the salience and relevance of this disability-specific African treaty while we already have a binding global disability rights treaty, which is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that is ratified by almost all member states of the African Union. So whenever you talk to governments, as mentioned when the moderator introduced me, I've been a regional director of the Africa Disability Alliance, which is a continental organization based in Pretoria. And I worked as a regional director for about 4 years. Between 2017 until 2020, until COVID struck. So one of the main areas of engagement for us was talking directly to governments, since the protocol was adopted in 2018, talking directly to governments about this protocol, about the fact that they need to ratify it as soon as possible to further revamp protection of their citizens with disabilities. And the question that almost all of them ask us is, why do we need this disability protocol in Africa when we already have an international disability rights treaty? The CRPD is the question they ask. So we need to answer that. As you know, the CRPD, the UN CRPD, is ratified by almost all member states of the AU. The only 3 countries that have taken no action, meaning that have neither signed nor ratified the CRPD, are 3 countries. I don't know if I have to mention them or not. Maybe it's good to mention them, so I will. Botswana, South Sudan, and Eritrea. So apart from these 3 countries, all member states of the AU have either ratified or signed the CRPD. So in the presence of this convention, why do we need an additional Africa-specific protocol is a question that you need to answer. And we have answers to that essential question. The Africa Disability Protocol brings nuanced, contextualized, salient issues that are important to the African context and that may not have been addressed, may not have been covered as much as we would like to in the CRPD. And we already have the legal tool or the legal ground to have a protocol that is attached to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. If you look at Article 60 and 61 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, you will see that supplementary protocols can be adopted within Africa to supplement the Charter on various specific topics. So you have various protocols that have already been adopted, and most of them have already entered into force that supplement the African Charter. Even if there is a provision in the African Charter itself that talks about disability, that provision does not cover the variety of aspects of disability rights as we understand them currently. And therefore, based on Article 60-61 of the African Charter, providing or drafting an Africa Disability Protocol is already justified by the African Charter. That's number one. There is a legal justification. Number two, there are various salient features in the Africa Disability Protocol that you would not find addressed in the CRPD. Issues of persons with albinism, for example, which is essential to the African context. We know the atrocities that persons with albinism go through in various African countries. You do not find any word in reference to persons with albinism mentioned in the CRPD. But this is an issue that is pertinent and urgent for Africa, and therefore that is mentioned in the Africa Disability Protocol, beginning with the preamble. You'll find persons with albinism addressed in the preamble of the African Charter. And then ritual practices, detrimental traditional practices are also, there is a standalone provision, Article 11 of the Africa Disability Protocol, that talks about harmful cultural practices. Now, this is also, as you all know, an issue that is key and critical to the African context. Of course, the CRPD does allude to detrimental traditional practices or disability-based detrimental traditional practices, harmful traditional practices. But that is emphasized, and there is a standalone provision in the Africa Disability Protocol for that particular topic, theme, because it is a matter more pertinent and that should be emphasized in Africa, within the African context. The other point that is emphasized in the Africa Disability Protocol compared to the CRPD is that of the value of community. Now, the value that community plays is also alluded to some extent by the CRPD, but not as much as it is within the Africa Disability Protocol. As most of you who may have read the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities can tell, the UNCRPD is more inclined to individualized rights, the rights of individuals, independent living, which has a bit of a Eurocentric tendency. For Africa, however, community means everything. We live as a community. Ubuntu is our way of life. Ubuntu means I am, as you all know, I am because you are because I am. We exist together, and my existence is relevant to yours and yours to me. This is a kind of communal philosophy, deep-rooted communal philosophy that we have in Africa, which we cannot avoid. So the Africa Disability Protocol has emphasized, has highlighted the role, the positive role that community can and should play in terms of disability inclusion. The positive role that Ubuntu can play to disability inclusion. Instead of ostracization or marginalization of persons with disabilities, the inclusion of persons with disabilities within the community and tapping into our values within our community is highlighted by the Africa Disability Protocol. So this is another salient feature that you'll find in the Africa Disability Protocol. The other salient feature is a demographic related point. And in terms of Africa, as you know, the population of youth, young people, constitute a significant dividend, a significant portion of the African population. Unlike other regions of the world, as you know, Africa is often dubbed as the youngest continent in the world because the population of youth is significant, much more than other demographic groups. And this is also tapped into and recognized in the Africa Disability Protocol, unlike the CRPD. Nowhere in the CRPD will you find the term youth mentioned. You can do a word search of the CRPD, the CRPD and its text. You can do a word search. You will not find the term youth or young. But in the Africa Disability Protocol, Article 29 in its entirety talks about youth with disabilities. If we talk about youth in general, we cannot avoid talking about youth with disabilities. And that is duly recognized by the Africa Disability Protocol by providing a standalone provision on youth with disabilities. Article 29. The same with older persons with disabilities. There is a standalone provision about older persons with disabilities under Article 30 of the protocol. Last but not least is the issue of self-representation. Again, the relevance that self-representation has, self-representation of persons with disabilities has, is recognized in the CRPD, but in the Africa Disability Protocol, you see that emphasized even further by providing a standalone provision on self-representation, Article 22 of the Africa Disability Protocol. You know, one phenomena that emerged after the CRPD, the UN CRPD entered into force, was that yes, it was one of the major accomplishments of the international disability rights fraternity, which I am part of, which we are all part of, but a trend that began to be seen was that even if we have an international disability rights treaty, representation of persons with disabilities by persons with disabilities has still been not sufficient, has still been less than satisfactory. So you see persons with disabilities represented by persons who may not have a lived experience of disability. And that is a major, major lacuna. No PhD, no expertise can replace a lived experience, my friends. And you ensure the fact that the topic that you work for, the right that you work for, whether it is women's rights, whether it is the rights of persons with disabilities or the rights of minorities, various other minorities, you need to ensure that that topic is led by those persons who have a lived experience of that particular context. Otherwise, the logo, the international slogan, nothing about us without us would be in vain. And therefore, you will find a standalone provision on self-representation in the Africa Disability Protocol, Article 22. And I must say that I'm humbly proud of the fact that during the drafting of the Africa Disability Protocol, I was part of ensuring that, you know, these points, especially the issue of self-representation, is highlighted in the protocol. There were validation sessions. There were several deliberations prior to the adoption of the protocol, and you know, through the Africa Disability Alliance and other organizations, it was an honor to be part of ensuring that self-representation, unlike the CRPD, is highlighted in the Africa Disability Protocol. So that is how you answer the essential question: why we need an Africa Disability Protocol. So the current status, as has been mentioned by colleagues earlier, we have 11 signatories of the protocol. 11 African states have signed the protocol, but we only have 3 ratifications hitherto. So far, Kenya, Rwanda, and Mali have ratified this protocol, and we should all applaud these nations for trailblazing in terms of ratification. And as mentioned earlier, we still need 12 more ratifications as per Article 36 of the Africa Disability Protocol, and we hope this would be achieved as indicated earlier by my colleagues by December this year, by the end of this year. I hope so. It has taken us 4 years so far. I'm sure it will not take us another 4 years, or not even another year. Now, one thing we should note is that compared to the trends of ratification and entry into force of other protocols to the African Charter, the Africa Disabilities Protocol's current status is no exception. You know, for example, the Maputo Protocol had entered into force in 2003. It was adopted in 2003. It entered into force in 2005. 2 years later, the African Youth Charter was adopted in 2006. It entered into force in 2009. The African Convention on Democracy, Election and Governance was adopted in 2007. It entered into force 5 years later. The Kampala Convention on IDPs, internally displaced persons, was adopted in 2009. It entered into force in 2012. We can mention other examples as well. The protocol on older persons as well took about 4 or 5 years. So this delay of between adoption of protocols to the African Charter and their entry into force is almost a trend within the African human rights mechanism. So the Africa Disability Protocol is not an exception in that regard. However, there have been, as far as the Africa Disability Protocol is concerned, there have been specific budgeted and targeted initiatives to change this narrative of limited ratification rates by African protocols when it comes to the Africa Disability Protocol. So there was a project called ARADI, Alliances for Rights, Africa Disability Inclusion, which was run by the Africa Disability Alliance from 2018 to 2020, which I was part of. There are consistent sensitization endeavors, as mentioned earlier, by the UP, the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights. You know, the Center for Human Rights is a trailblazer in this regard compared to similar institutions, similar academic institutions that we have in Africa. So there have been consistent efforts in this regard. We have the Africa Disability Forum as well, which, as we speak, is conducting workshops in various African countries to lobby for ratification of fast-track ratification of the protocol. But COVID-19 is something that we cannot deny has been a hurdle in terms of these efforts that have been made. So from 2018 up until 2020, there were significant efforts, and among the 11 countries that have signed the protocol, most of them, over 70% of them, signed between 2018 and 2020 until COVID struck. When COVID came, that effort, that exciting effort and that encouraging effort lost momentum, literally lost momentum. You don't really lobby governments effectively through virtual platforms. This kind of effort requires in-person engagements, and COVID had affected that significantly. But now we are re-emerging out of that. Those of us who were lucky enough to survive the perils of COVID, and those of us in the disability fraternity now are beginning to continue from where we left off prior to 2020. And therefore, that is why I hope and believe that the target stated earlier by my colleague Wilson, for example, to have this protocol enter into force at the end of this year is reasonable. I wouldn't say that is an inflated ambition, because a momentum is picking up and various stakeholders are making an effort from various directions, including the Center for Human Rights. Now, the role of stakeholders in fast-tracking ratification and implementation is something that we also need to take note of. Who are the role players, and who should we expect to augment and revamp their efforts towards fast-tracking ratification of the protocol? The first duty bearer is the African Union itself. The African Union Commission, which is based right here in my hometown in Addis Ababa, and its various organs, including the human rights wing of the African Union that is based at Banjul, the Gambia, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. These are principal duty bearers. If you look at Article 3 of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, when you look at the objectives of the Union, it says, and I quote, the objectives of the African Union, the objective of the African Union is to promote and protect human and people's rights in accordance with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other relevant human rights instruments. So the African Union Commission must support these kinds of efforts, at least by showing up to these kinds of meetings and providing explanations as to what the private sector or non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations and parastatals like national human rights institutions can do. And there is a structure within the African Union that you should be aware of, a unique structure called African Union Disability Architecture. And this was established as per Decision 750 of the African Union Summit, one of the African Union summits. And we already have a disability-focused structure within the African Union. And then we have the Pan-African Parliament, which is based in Midrand, South Africa. And the Pan-African Parliament already has a model law on disability. We need to tap into that and lobby the Pan-African Parliament to keep that effort, which they began prior to COVID, to keep on lobbying their member states to ratify the ADP. And the other distinct stakeholders or role players are the Pan-African Disability Federations, national organizations of persons with disabilities, civil society organizations, national human rights institutions. These all come under one category. You know, PADFs, OPDs, CSOs, these all come under one category in addition to the African Union. But there is an issue, there is an Achilles heel as far as non-governmental players are concerned, and or stakeholders are concerned, and that issue is the issue of coordination. For example, what the Center for Human Rights at UP is doing here should be known by the Africa Disability Forum, the Africa Disability Alliance, so that we can use the limited resources that these institutions have to further strengthen the efforts that that these stakeholders make. So there is a coordination issue. There is the issue of working in silos, which, as I said earlier, is an Achilles heel of disability movements, by the way. So I hope that can be tapped into by bringing together, whenever platforms like this are organized, we should let the various stakeholders be aware of it, so that they can come and see what the gaps are and how they can complement that gap instead of reinventing the wheel. The other stakeholder category of stakeholder is the media. Popularization of the protocol is important. Prior to COVID, when we went to the various countries, Tanzania, Rwanda, Kenya, I remember one thing that we do right after workshops on lobbying and advocacy is doing media briefings, doing press releases on the Africa Disability Protocol. That played a significant role, but it has to continue. So that is an essential. Whoever has not engaged the media would not succeed in these kinds of efforts of promoting treaties, etc. So that is something we also always need to keep in mind. And another example that we should already learn from to fast track the ratification of the ADP is tapping into important lessons and best practices already observed in other protocols of the African Charter. For example, there was what's called Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa in 2004, which was aimed at popularizing and fast-tracking ratification of the Maputo Protocol on women's rights. And this kind of declaration targeted at ratification of that protocol indeed helped to fast-track its ratification. It showed results. So we need a similar kind of declaration within the African Union that is that sort of allocates certain resources, regardless of the limited resources that we have, and that will promote the ratification of the protocol. So a declaration targeted at ratification. Again, in 2020, the AU declared the year 2020 as a year for universal ratification, domestication, and implementation of the Maputo Protocol. So these kind of declarations are important, and I encourage the organizers of this meeting and the Center for Human Rights and other stakeholders to make it a point for the African Union to declare either this year or next year. It might be late this year maybe, but next year as a year for universal ratification and domestication of the Africa Disability Protocol, even after it enters into force. So these are examples that we already have within the Africa Disability Protocol. Now, I'm almost done. Another issue that you would encounter is that if there happen to be certain differences or interpretation issues between the Africa Disability Protocol and the UN CRPD, for example, you should always refer to Article 36 of the Africa Disability Protocol, which is a safeguard, which is called a safeguard clause. And also Article 4, subarticle 4 of the CRPD encourages instruments, various regional instruments or treaties to be adopted and enter into force if they protect the best interest of that category of persons for which the treaty is intended. So if we look at Article 36 of the Africa Disability Protocol, it reads as follows: no provision in this protocol shall be interpreted as derogating from the principles and values contained in other relevant instruments for the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. And in the event of a contradiction between two or more provisions of the protocol, the interpretation which favors the rights of persons with disabilities and protects their legitimate interests shall apply. Our threshold is the best interest of persons with disabilities. So, and that is highlighted in the protocol as well as in the CRPD. They complement each other. In no way do they deviate from each other, these two treaties. Finally, the root causes of disability exclusion to always keep in mind and address are as follows. Why do we have these delays of ratifying important treaties like the Africa Disability Protocol? The issue is more systemic. And one manifestation of that is ableism. Ableism is a system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on socially constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, excellence, and productivity. It's a systemic operation that leads to people in society determining who is valuable and worthy based on a person's appearance or their ability to produce, excel, etc. Our leaders, ladies and gentlemen, our decision makers may knowingly or unknowingly be ableists. They may have ableism as a mindset, which we need to challenge. Nobody has chosen to be a person with disability, just like nobody chooses to be of a certain gender or to be of a certain race. And therefore, nobody should be discriminated against for something that they have not chosen to be. If they do, if there is a discrimination on the basis of disability, we call that ableism. And this is a systemic, structural, deep-rooted issue that we always need to tap into, and we need to inform, enlighten our leaders as to the fact that persons with disabilities, if provided the right opportunities, can be significant contributive citizens to their respective countries. And ableism should be addressed as a venom, just like sexism, racism, and all other nonsense-isms that you see, you find out there. Another thing is this quote that I always find enlightening. And I'm quoting one of my favorite disability rights professors based at the University of Berkeley in California, Professor Marcia Saxton. And she says, and I quote, "The biggest barrier in disability is not the impairment, but the impression." The biggest, end quote, the biggest barrier in disability is not the fact that I'm a polio survivor, that I have a disability of some sort, that my colleague Wilson has a disability of some sort. That is not our biggest barrier. The biggest barrier is the impression, the erroneous impression that people and the system extends towards us. Disability is fundamentally rooted in the society, not in our impairment, is another deep-rooted systemic issue that you need to unpack to the relevant decision makers as you advocate for the ratification of the treaty. Finally, we need to tell our decision makers that inclusion is not a program, nor is it a project. It's not something that we do depending on availability of funding or whether we have certain resources or not. Inclusion should not be dependent or on availability or non-availability of resources. Inclusion, first and foremost, is a mindset. It is the way we treat others and the way they treat us. Inclusion is an opportunity to learn together and from one another, and we do it because it is the right thing to do. For the ratification of the Africa Disability Protocol because it is the right thing to do. I thank you, and sorry if I exceeded the time that I was given.
Thank you, Doug, for your excellent presentation. We learned a lot this morning. Thank you. Just to add my voice to what Doug has said, I think it's imperative for African countries to ratify the protocol because it will signal not only commitment, but also the national laws that will follow up will facilitate the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities in those respective countries. And I think it's also important that we all join the Center for Human Rights in its campaign and all other disability organizations across Africa in this campaign of advocacy and an advocacy that will ram up support for the ratification. And I think 15 ratification is definitely what we will be able to achieve before December. So thank you, Doug, once again. And I give the floor now to my colleague, Jonas Sindani, to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Enoch, and greetings all, and welcome again to this session. I'm Jonas Sindani from Democratic Republic of Congo, and I will have a pleasure to moderate this panel with Clement Mavungu on the Pan-African perspectives vis-à-vis the process of the ratification of the ADRP protocol. And without wasting the time, I will present you the profile of our speaker and the subject of its intervention. Clement Mavungu is an international lawyer from Democratic Republic of Congo, and currently he's a legal counsel at the Pan-African Parliament. And it is in this quality that he will intervene in this webinar. He holds an LLB, licence en droit, at University of Kinshasa in Democratic Republic of Congo, and a Master's of Law in Human Rights and Democratization of Africa at University of Pretoria in South Africa. And prior to that, he was a coordinator of the FEDH program on the African Court on Human and People's Rights. And previously, he was a legal advisor at the International Court of Justice African Regional Program. Clement will bring us in the following 15 or 20 minutes through the position of the Pan-African Parliament and the steps taken by the Pan-African Parliament to inspire the process of ratification of the ADRP protocol. And I think you will have an opportunity to present what is the Pan-African Parliament and its mandate. And without wasting the time, bonjour Clément, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonas. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, indeed. I thank you very much for inviting us to this webinar. And thank you again for the generous introduction. I would start by greeting respectfully with all protocols, all participants to this webinar, and say that we are indeed happy to be part of these discussions, where I have been invited to share with you on the role, but particularly the practical steps taken by the Pan-African Parliament towards the ratification of the protocol, but more importantly, domestication and implementation, because as I'll be discussing, I would like to share the fact that the Pan-African Parliament has tried to go further than promoting the ratification, to even start promoting domestication and implementation. And to do so, I will just briefly introduce the Pan-African Parliament, specifically its mandate, and then I will discuss the practical steps taken towards promoting the ratification, domestication, and implementation of the protocol. And lastly, before concluding, I will discuss some challenges and the potential remedial action that can be taken to overcome those challenges. The Pan-African parliaments might not need to be introduced anymore, because I would probably anticipate that all participants in this forum are aware of the Pan-African Parliament. But it will be fair to say that the Pan-African Parliament as an organ set up to ensure the full participation of African peoples in the development and economic integration of the African continent bears on its shoulders all categories of African peoples, including persons with disabilities that are the subject of this webinar. And I'm starting with this just to show the relevance of the Pan-African Parliament to the discourse relating to disability rights. And indeed, when we look at the mandates of the Pan-African Parliament, the PAP is indeed empowered to discuss any issue, and make recommendations, and even adopt resolutions pertaining to any matter, including human rights, democracy, good governance, and so forth. And this again strengthens my argument that the Pan-African Parliament is indeed at the core of this discourse. And this is what basically led the Pan-African Parliament to be mindful of its role and mandate, and take a number of actions that I'm going to discuss with you. The first action that I want to share relates to making the disability issue a key issue in the agenda of the Pan-African Parliament, at least since 2016. Working together with other concerned stakeholders, and I would particularly name the Africa Disability Alliance, members of the Pan-African Parliament were sensitized and even capacity built to be able to stand and speak confidently and strongly on issues to do with disability. And for me, that was the starting point, because it led to the situation where the Pan-African Parliament would have the issue of disability discussed in its committees and discussed even in plenary. And this led particularly, this resulted in the adoption of a set of recommendations and resolutions. Now, the recommendations basically called for the African Union member states, and particularly African parliaments, to also escalate the issue of disability, to ensure that parliamentary functions across Africa can mainstream the rights of persons with disabilities, to the extent that whether parliament are exercising their lawmaking function, whether they are debating the budget, the national budget, or whether they are exercising oversight over the executive and in their representational function as well. They make sure that the issue of disability is integrated and is part and parcel of not only their agenda, but the outputs, the parliamentary outputs. And indeed, as I previously said, members of the Pan-African Parliament were systematically, with the assistance of ADA and the Center for Human Rights, indeed, the members of Parliament were consistently and systematically empowered, and they were provided with the necessary tools to be able to go back home and advance the disability right agenda. And I think this increased sensitization of the members led to some tangible results. Indeed, as I said, the disability issue became key at the Pan-African Parliament since 2016. And there's an extent to which the PAP can reclaim the benefits of the adoption of the protocol, while acknowledging the key role played by various organizations, including civil society organizations and other African Union organs. And without waiting for the protocol to enter into force, after garnering the requisite number of ratifications, the Pan-African Parliament embarked in the process of developing a model law on disability in Africa. And indeed, one key questions arose at the time whether it was indeed timely to anticipate or to preempt the entry into force of the protocol by developing a model law on disability. And indeed, a way out was found, and everyone was convinced that indeed, and I really appreciate the presentation made by my predecessor who spoke, without discounting the specificities of the disability protocol. Indeed, at the time we had to rely on the existing instruments, for instance, the African Charter and the other relevant instruments which could be relied on as a legal basis for a law or for a model law on disability. And indeed, a very prudent approach was taken to insert in the model law core principles of the protocol. And indeed, for those who have had an opportunity to read or to access this model law, they will definitely be able to make a parallel between the prescriptions of the model law with the provisions of the protocol and even other legal instruments. The model law has been adopted. It was adopted in October 2019. And indeed, the COVID situation might have contributed to the limited promotion and dissemination of the model law, and even sensitization But I must acknowledge that we had some good responses from a number of countries. I'm giving the example of Mauritius, for instance, which was in the process of developing a model law on disability, and they engaged the PAP so that they can use the PAP model law on disability. And indeed, our members of parliament have still continued to advocate and to push for the model law to be adopted, or at least to be integrated where other legislations relevant to the rights of persons with disabilities are developed. And maybe to close on this chapter, I also think that the Pan-African Parliament, being in the process of reviewing its rules of procedure, has been specifically influenced to ensure that the new rules of procedure of the Pan-African Parliament integrate the disability aspect in terms of facilitating access, physical access for persons with disabilities, but particularly general access to the organs of the Pan-African Parliament, particularly the committees. And indeed, we have a committee, a permanent committee, whose mandate includes, among other things, issues to do with disabilities. So before moving to the challenges, quickly, I wanted to highlight that the protocol on the right of persons with disabilities in Africa is part of the 13 legal instruments of the African Union, which the Pan-African Parliament is working on to promote not only their ratification, but specifically their domestication and implementation. And a number of advocacy missions were undertaken last year to various destinations to put in place a mechanism by which a technical mechanism which facilitates interactions between the Pan-African Parliament and the national parliaments as far as ratification of the AU instruments. The AU treaties is concerned. And in so doing, I thought I could share a few challenges that the Pan-African Parliament sometimes faces. The first challenge is the high turnover of members of parliament. And as you know, the membership of members of the Pan-African Parliament runs concurrently with their tenure at the national level. So as a result, where an election takes place and a parliament dissolves, some of the PAP members who were the pioneers of for the ratification, domestication, and implementation of some of these instruments, including the disability protocol, we lose them. And as a result, sometimes advocacy for the ratification and domestication implementation suffers as a result. And that's why, as a way forward, as a remedial action, we need to ensure that capacitation and sensitization is sustained I acknowledge the number of times where the members of Pan-African Parliament were capacity built, were sensitized on disability issues, probably in 2016, 17. This should not stop. The Pan-African Parliament itself and working hand in hand with concerned civil society organizations should continue to ensure that capacitation and sensitization never ends. Secondly, I also note a lack of strategic and patient advocacy, because sometimes, and I'm speaking as someone who started work from civil society, sometimes we tend to look for immediate results, and sometimes we get discouraged. And yet sometimes there's time for sowing, and there will be time for reaping the benefits of sowing. And again, this links to the issue of sustainability in our engagement that I talked about. And I link it with the argument made by the previous speaker on the minimum time for entry into force of AU instruments. And for me, really, if we count from 2018, we may be a bit alarmed because it is 3 years down the line, but we may also not be hard on ourselves by removing and indeed he also made reference to that, removing the COVID period, and indeed not cross our arms to say, I think we are still on the right track. All efforts must be made to not to lose patience, but to do what it takes to have the requisite number of ratifications. Thirdly, and the previous speaker spoke about it, somehow fragmented and disparate efforts, but I still note the fact that the Pan-African Parliament would not have been able to come up and adopt a model law on disability without the involvement and the support of the African Disability Alliance and other African Union organs and departments. So meaning that working together, having worked together to develop some of these instruments, even the protocol and the model law, we should continue to work together for popularization, for promoting ratification, for promoting implementation. So meaning we need also sustained coordination and collaboration in our efforts. And in so doing, indeed, no one should be left behind. Sharing of information, and particularly with the proactiveness that it deserves. And I was recently speaking with a colleague about the publication, and I think probably this is the publication that the previous speaker talked about. And I really expressed the recommendation that such an invaluable document, ratification tool, should also be shared with the various stakeholders, particularly members of the Pan-African Parliament to further support them, to further capacitate them in the role which they have to play at the national level. And lastly, the Pan-African Parliament, as you know, is an advisory and consultative organ of the African Union. And indeed, what the PAP can do in this process can only be within the confines of its advisory and consultative mandates. Therefore, the Pan-African Parliament also always sensitizes civil society organizations and citizens of Africa to support its ratification for an assumption of full legislative powers, because a stronger parliament would be able to more strongly advance the rights and aspirations of the people. And I'll conclude by indeed applauding all the meritorious efforts made by civil society, by other stakeholders, and reiterate the fact that indeed the Pan-African Parliament has taken a number of laudable actions, but while acknowledging that indeed more needs to be done, and whatever has been done should be sustained indeed with the collaboration and support from civil society and from other stakeholders. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clement, for your intervention, which was about the position of the Pan-African Parliament to the discourse of disability rights in Africa. And we understood that the Pan-African Parliament had understood some actions, such as to put the disability right as a key issue on the Pan-African Parliament, and as well to develop a model law on disability rights in Africa to anticipate the ratification of the ADLP protocol. And this model law encompasses the key principle of the ADLP. And we hope that now in this after COVID period, the process will be accelerated by your institution, and you increased awareness about the protocol. And without waste the time, I will give the floor to my colleague Farouk to bring us through the next panel. Farouk, can you hear us?
Thank you, Jonas Sindani. I can hear you quite clearly.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Greetings, everyone across the continent and across the globe. I'm Farouk Hadidoin, another LLM MPhil student in Human Rights and Democratization in Africa at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. We shall now have our first panel, which makes up NHRIs, and we would actually have the NHRI perspective of two specific influential African countries, to which the Sierra Leone Human Rights Commission and equally so the South African Human Rights Commission. From the Sierra Leone Human Rights Commission, we would be having Mr. Abubakar Kamara giving us insights on the topic, and we would be having Siadile Tlali from the South African Human Rights Commission. So with that said, I'd like to call on Mr. Abubakar Kamara from the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone to give us an insight on the protection of disability rights in Sierra Leone, by domestic law. And additionally so, what inroads has the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone, being the NHRI accredited institution of Sierra Leone, what inroads they've made in respect of agitating to the government of Sierra Leone to sign and equally ratify and domesticate the African Disability Rights Protocol of 2018. Mr. Abubakar Kamara, we have you. Thank you so much.
Good morning here. I am Abubakar Kamara, and I am the Disability and Non-Discrimination Officer of the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone. The Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone is an institution established by Parliament with the mandate to protect and promote human rights of all in Sierra Leone. With regards to disability issues, Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone has a unit which is titled the Disability and Non-Discrimination Unit, and I'm the officer in charge of that unit. The unit directly relates to all, disability organizations in the country that deals with disability issues, because we have the broader mandate to protect and promote human rights. But we ensure that over the years, we've been actively involved with disability issues in the country. This is reflected in the fact that before the establishment of the National Commission for Persons with Disability, which is the national institution that protects and promotes the rights of persons with disability, we took a step with regards to how we can actively partake in parliamentary sittings leading up to the establishment of the commission. Or before that also, this unit has served as the only institution within a country to have a special unit to protect and promote the rights of persons with disability in the country. So Sierra Leone domesticated the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability in 2011. We actively, we are part of the Disability Act of 2011. The Disability Act of 2011 actually is a domesticated instrument of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which takes into consideration key rights and privileges enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. The Act also sees that most of, the rights and privileges that are, that most of the citizens do not go, in accordance with are dealt with. But specifically, sections 14 to 21 deals with the rights and privileges of persons with disability. The Act also ensures that individuals who go against most of, the doctrines that are stipulated in the Act are dealt with. But certain key things are missing. That's why I'm here today. One is the Act fails to take into consideration, how persons with disability can actively take part with regards to, electioneering processes. The Act only creates provision that persons with disability, have right and access to, polling stations. It's no special credence as how, they can create a special quota on how they can, actively partake in issues of elections and all that. The Act also fails to take into consideration how we can protect the rights of, disabled rights activists. Over the years, we've been having issues with the police on how, victims, mostly persons with disability, come in contact with the law. And as a commission, we've tried as much as we can to, in fact, empower and build the capacity of the National Commission for Persons with Disability. In 2017, we drafted an MOU. We actually ensured that we did a holistic view on how they can receive complaints, both from individuals and from groups, on alleged violations and abuse of persons with disability. We also built the capacity of the NCPD in ensuring that we train their staff on issues related to human rights in general. But with regards to how state entities protect the rights of vulnerable groups or institutions that protect, or groups that protect the rights of persons with disability, the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone has ensured that we create a referral pathway, because we cannot usurp the powers of the National Commission for Persons with Disability, because the domesticated act of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the Persons with Disability Act of Sierra Leone, gives the National Commission for Persons with Disability the powers, to ensure the well-being of persons with disability. It also gives them the powers to take institutions and individuals to court who, fail to take into consideration how these rights that are enshrined, these privileges that are enshrined in the Act are not, are not in accordance with. So most times we have a complaint, we have a Directorate of Complaints, Investigations and Legal Services within the Human Rights Commission that takes complaints directly from the public, from private individuals, from governments, from those working in the MDAs, that's ministries, departments, and agencies, on how their rights have been violated. The empowerment that we've given to the National Commission for Persons with Disability speaks directly to how they can, receive complaints. But as a commission, when the 5 commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone sits, they have the powers of the High Court. So most of the decisions they take are by law enforceable. So over the years, we've also tried as much as we can to take an active role in the review of the Persons with Disability Act, because the Act in itself since 2011 in its form has been vague, and in fact its implementation processes have been questioned from all spheres. The National Commission for Persons with Disability, the statutory body that ensures that rights of persons with disability are protected, is not fully equipped. As I'm talking to you, the organization, the whole institution itself cannot boast of the staff capacity of up to 40. And these are some of the things we as a commission have been discussing over the years. We recommended that budgetary support be increased to the commission. We've also recommended that the structure, because structural adaptation is key in enjoyment of rights for persons with disability. We've also seen that over the years, persons with disability cannot actually access the building that protects and promotes their rights. So because 2 years back, it got bombed, so they had to be relocated. But how can you relocate a building in a location wherein the building itself is not accessible? So these are some of the things. But let me get you back to our role in reviewing the Persons with Disability Act. We have a statutory function to review existing legislation and with the key to ensure that they are in line with human rights standards. So basically, each and every law within the county that has human rights implication, the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone normally takes part in that. And we normally issue out position papers at the end of every sitting as a commission. We tender this position paper to the committee responsible for reviewing. But during the review processes, we've tried to, we've noted a variety of key issues with regards to, the state's obligations, with regards to how we can, ensure that they give more credence, more powers, more independence to the National Commission for Persons with Disability. Because the National Commission for Persons with Disability is not an independent institution. In a sense, it's under the office of the Ministry of Gender, the Ministry of Social Welfare. That means the activities of the commission, what they do, is under the supervision of the minister. So as a commission, we've recommended that this institution become independent and it should function as an independent entity, devoid of any government interference. Because we all know, and also during the review, we noted that the role key disabled organizations play in ensuring that rights are promoted nationally. We've tried as much as we can to ensure that key disabled organizations be part of the board that take decision when it comes to respecting the rights of persons with disability in the country. So, as early as last year, we received a complaint from a disabled rights group with regards to their rights being violated by the Sierra Leone police. You know, as a commission, we have our powers, but we also have limitations. We cannot delve into any matters that are actively in the court. So we had to wait and ensure that when the court has taken, or we can also not relate or delve into any matter that the court has taken the decision over. But the decision back then was that the police, in fact, the decision of the court was that they should drop all charges because these persons with disability were taken to police cells. You know, I monitor the process. We monitor the process as a commission. We ensured that we noted that persons with disability were placed in the same cells as normal, able-bodied persons. We also noted that there were signs, of abuse and inhuman and degrading treatments to these persons with disability. We got an engagement with the Sierra Leone police. They gave us their own sides. But the key thing is now, as a commission, we've seen that the violation on the rights of persons with disability has been so, the reports, the complaints against the police has been growing over the years. So what we did was to ensure that with support from the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, we took into consideration a public inquiry into the conduct of law enforcement officers, which includes the Sierra Leone police, metropolitan officers, the army, and all, because these are the people we as a commission just took into consideration as law enforcement officers. So we try as much as we can to start from 2015 to 2020. Yes, no, from 2015 to 2021. To take into consideration how law enforcement officers have been dealing with issues of violations against persons, and specifically also persons with disability. And interestingly, the matter with regards to how we had several complaints, several individual and group complaints on how the police and other groups have not been protected. So as a commission, because this is a long process, we have the responsibility, of course, to promote and protect the rights of all, including persons with disability. We also have the responsibility to advise governments with regards to international obligations, they owe. That is why we have the Directorate of Treaty Body reporting. So when we advise government on these international treaties, specifically the ratification of the optional protocol to the rights of persons with disability, how that brings positive and brightens the country's human rights status is another thing. But commitment on the side of government also to ensure that they sign, become signatories and ratify, because it's also another thing. Imagine the status of implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. The country was lagged behind with regards to reporting. So we know as a country, we reported in 2019 on on Article 33, which speaks to giving each state party giving a report to the status of implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. So we hope, as a country, we have to reflect because we are still growing. As an institution, of course, we know we have, as a grade A institution, we have over the years ensured that rights are not only protected. In fact, we are the first institution in this country to ensure that we have a disability unit desk. This can be traced as far back as early 2000, 2007. And the earliest ways when in the earliest establishment of the commission. So we are learning, we are growing, we have a statutory function to advise government in ratifying these protocols, these conventions, these treaties we signed. We also have a responsibility as a state institution to ensure the well-being of the civil rights organizations who over the years have been, who their rights have been infringed upon over the years with regards to how they can enjoy them. So I think with these few, insights, I have, deliberated on some of the key ways we as a commission relate to, certain institutions in the country, and specifically its institutions.
Due to network connections, I think we just lost Mr. Abubakar Kamara, and notwithstanding, we would like to say thank you to the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone, and we are supposed to also have a representative from the South African Human Rights Commission, but however, we've just been notified that they will join in subsequently. So we would move on to our next panel. With that regard, I'll call on Mr. Sines Yosambo to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Farouk. Greetings, everybody. My name is Sines Yosambo. And like the previous moderators, I'm a student at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, where I'm pursuing a Master's of Laws in Human Rights and Democratization in Africa. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Clodoaldo Castellano, who is an ardent Mozambican human rights defender. Clodoaldo holds a Bachelor of Laws from Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique, and a Master of Laws in International and Comparative Disability Rights from the Center for International and Comparative Disability Rights, National University of Ireland in Galway. He currently serves as an executive coordinator of the Forum of Mozambican Association of Persons with Disabilities, an organization that stands at the forefront of the campaign for the ratification of the Africa Disability Protocol by the Mozambican state, which is a process that is almost concluded. It's precisely on the said process that Clodoaldo will be speaking in the next few minutes. Without further ado, Clodoaldo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sinesio, for this for inviting me to this very important webinar, and greetings to everyone. I will just open my camera for an instant, but I will close it because the connection is not the best one from the point I'm speaking. So I will be, as Sinesio said, I will be sharing with you the experience of Mozambique in the ratification process of the African Disability Protocol. Okay. I hope you can you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is great. This will be a short presentation. I will, as soon as you said, Mozambique is about to finalize the ratification of the African Disability Protocol. So at the internal level, all the steps have been completed. There's only one missing step, which is the actual ratification, depositing the ratification documents at the African Union. So I will share with you here the actions that we took here in Mozambique, particularly as part of the Forum of Associations of Persons with Disabilities, the umbrella organization of persons with disabilities in Mozambique. So I will share with you the strategy we adopted in this process, hoping that it can be replicated somewhere, and of course to learn also from your insights. So my presentation will cover only these four aspects: how we took advantage of a mainstream human rights process, the universal periodic review mechanism, to advance the ratification of the African Disability Protocol. I will share with you which is this missing process and why we are still stuck in this missing step to complete ratification. I will share with you key lessons I think we can take from the process in Mozambique, and also reflected on the challenge that that we face in Mozambique, and I think that other countries also are facing. I think most of you are familiar with the Universal Periodic Review mechanism. It's a UN mechanism which whereby member states revised in relation to their human rights situation. It's a process that goes for 4.5 years, which is supposed to involve all member states of the UN. So Mozambique was revised from 2020 to 2021, and we as FAMOD, the Federation or the Forum of Associations of Persons with Disabilities, we in 2020, in October 2020, we submitted the first disability-specific human rights report to this mechanism in Mozambique, in which, of course, we underlined the need to ratify the African Disability Protocol as a necessary step to strengthen the national legal and policy framework. In March 2021, we were invited to take part in a pre-session. Basically, in a pre-session, you have the opportunity to address the delegation of the member states that will be revising your state, and share your priorities. What you think should be they should be recommending your state in this in the revision session. So we had the opportunity to participate in this session, and again, we underlined that we have this African protocol, and it can actually improve the legal and policy framework in Mozambique, and it worked, because in September, the revision report of Mozambique was published, and a specific recommendation on the ratification of this protocol was made by actually more than one state. So the government now had a very concrete recommendation from the international system of human rights to ratify this protocol. As you certainly know, in the UPR mechanism, you have the opportunity, the government has the opportunity to either accept or note the recommendations. When the government notes the recommendation, it's actually saying that it's not ready yet to implement this recommendation. So in the case of the ratification of the African Disability Protocol, the government actually accepted the recommendation, and it didn't take long until the government organized consulted with organizations of persons with disabilities to see if this was in fact a relevant instrument to be ratified. And we had the opportunity to state our position, and of course, we used all these arguments that the previous speakers mentioned, the fact that the African Disability Protocol has a stronger intersectionality approach, which is also much more connected to the African context. We mentioned that this is a new opportunity in terms of reporting to the African system. We mentioned that we had much more specific provisions to the African related to the African context, and the government understood our position, and actually it proposed to the parliament in December the ratification of this treaty, and the parliament approved a resolution authorizing the ratification of this of the protocol in December. So it was a very expeditious process internally. This is the ratification process is not yet finalized, as we mentioned. The very final step, which actually legally is the ratification, is what counts for ratification, has not been taken yet by the government. So all the ratification documents haven't been deposited yet at the African Union, and this is usually a problem in Mozambique, because we have a previous negative experience on the CRPD. Internally, the CRPD ratification was approved in 2010, but the ratification was not completed until 2012. So there's usually a bureaucratic issue in terms of ratification. So everyone assumed that the ratification process was completed in 2010, but in fact it had not. And we see the same scenario right now. Government officers, even organizations working on disability, actually assume that ratification has been finalized, but it hasn't. So we have been engaging with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to speed up this ratification process, because the ministry that is responsible for disability in Mozambique is the Ministry for Social Affairs. So it was the Minister for Social Affairs who proposed the ratification of the CRPD. But then once the ratification is approved, she's supposed to notify the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that they take the documents to the African Union. So we are already engaging with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because it's usually here where the process takes long. And we hope to have an answer from them soon. Which good practices can we take from this process in Mozambique? So from my point of view, it's key that a national movement is taking place in each country, pushing for the ratification of the African Protocol. So it's not enough to have this regional movement. It's also important to have conversations going on regularly at the national level, to engage the organizations of persons with disabilities at national level, because they are the ones who will clearly state the arguments for the ratification of the CRPD. So I think we managed to create this movement in Mozambique to around this ratification of the CRPD, and this clearly came to the government noticed this movement and understood that it was relevant for persons with disabilities, not just for specialists, human rights specialists, but also for persons with disabilities themselves. Another lesson we can take from the Mozambique case is that we actually took advantage of a mainstream human rights process, the Universal Periodic Mechanism, to advance a regional agenda. So there are, of course, other human rights process. I'm sure that in every country, there's always some a human rights review process taking on women rights, on children's rights. There are always human rights review mechanisms going on. So we can take advantage of these processes to include this recommendation on ratification of the African Disability Protocol. These recommendations, the recommendations seriously. So we can take advantage of this mainstream process, but also of the disability-specific processes. For instance, some countries are being reviewed by the CRPD committee. So make sure to include this recommendation in the engagement you have with the CRPD committee. Also, there are other processes such as the Global Disability Summit. Back in 2018, in the first Global Disability Summit, we also added a specific recommendation on the adoption of this protocol. So what we are trying to do is to make sure that the African Disability Protocol is part of the conversation in different human rights mechanisms. So I think this can be a useful tactic. For those who are willing to use the Universal Periodic Mechanism, it can be a good idea to connect with countries, African countries, that are leading this ratification chain, so that they recommend to the reviewing country to ratify this protocol. So I think the delegations will be more than willing to support that. And a final lesson I would like to share is that actually in Mozambique, we realized that the government was willing to ratify this protocol. In fact, our government is a pro-ratifying government. Like they like to ratify everything, every human rights instrument, except those that might get them into troubles. So, and I think that's the case for many other African countries. African countries like to ratify human rights instruments because these instruments help them to look good at the international level. So, but some governments are not aware of this protocol because in the case of Mozambique, for instance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to be, at the forefront, had to make some pressure to the Ministry of Social Affairs to take this process forward. So sometimes there's not a good connection between different government sectors. So the information around the human rights instruments is lost in some cases. So the responsible entity might actually not be aware of the need to promote the ratification of these instruments. So organizing workshops, engaging bilaterally with these ministries can be a good idea. It comes back to building this movement at the national level around the African Stability Protocol. So I would, just to finalize, I would like to reflect a little bit on an aspect that has been touched upon by the previous speakers. My question is, how can we ensure that the campaign for the ratification of the African Protocol is not just a box-ticking exercise, and that the protocol achieves its full potential on the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa? We cannot avoid to think about this, and in my point of view, actually, this question, answering to this question, we will also be finding solutions to speed up the ratification process at the African Union. I think that academically, we all understand the purpose and the relevance and the rationale of the African Disability Protocol. But I think that at the advocacy level, in the engagement with governments, with local organizations, I don't think that it's clear enough that this relevance is clear enough, and that's from our own experience. I think that from the conversations we had in the beginning with government, I think that they actually did not understand the added value that this protocol was bringing, and here the risk is that the governments simply ratify the protocol without understanding what obligations actually they are committing to, new obligations they are committing to, or that they simply don't ratify because they understand that there's no added value, that the African protocol doesn't add any value. So there's an exercise that needs to be done to actually connect the advocacy campaign to the underpinning rationale of the African Disability Protocol. All these elements that the previous speakers have touched upon, the stronger intersectionality approach that the African Disability Protocol, brings, the specific provisions related to African context issues. So the ratification campaign should actually not be a ratification campaign. It should be a campaign for a higher commitment to disability issues among African governments, because that's what has been failing, and the CRPT clearly didn't respond to that. So we see in different African countries that social and economic situation of persons with disabilities has been deteriorating. We see that, for instance, in Mozambique, the legal frameworks haven't been adjusted to match the CRPD standard. So we are not just campaigning for ratification. We are campaigning for these governments to be accountable for the rights of persons with disabilities. We are campaigning for them to address the human rights threats that exist in the African context against the persons with abilities, against persons with psychosocial disabilities, against persons with albinism. So it's not just a bureaucratic campaign. It's not a campaign for delivering documents or for signing documents. No, it's a campaign to respond to specific problems that persons with disabilities are facing in Africa. So I think we really need to work better connecting our campaign to the specific problems that persons with disabilities are living on the ground. And that's, for instance, the strategy we used in Mozambique when we were campaigning for the government to accept the disability recommendations made in the UPR mechanism. So we built a campaign which actually conveyed lived experience of persons with disabilities and how this experience connected to the recommendations that were made in that mechanism. So it was clear for the government that they had to accept those recommendations because it would help them address those problems. So in my point of view, we will still need to work at the advocacy level to connect this ratification campaign to the problems that persons with disabilities are facing in Africa. So I think I will stop here. That my presentation. Over to you, Sinasi.
Thank you very much, Clodoaldo, for sharing with us a more practical perspective of the process of ratification of the disability protocol, especially for sharing the lessons you have learned from the said process and for sharing the challenges you face. Very much appreciated. In the interest of time, we will now move to our next speaker, who is Miss Farida Mamad. Miss Farida Mamad holds a Bachelor of Laws from Eduardo Mondlane University and a Master of Laws in Human Rights and Democratization in Africa from the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. Yes, she is a proud alumni of this program. She is currently a doctoral candidate at Hasselt University in Belgium. Ms. Mamad has been involved in key human rights initiatives in various capacities, most notably as an academic and activist. She is currently the Deputy Director of the Center, the Training and Legal, the Center for Legal and Judiciary Training. Prior to that, she worked as a legal advisor to the Mozambican Supreme Court and spokeswoman for the Mozambican Human Rights Commission. Without any further delay, Ms. Mamad, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sinesi. First of all, good morning, everyone. It's good afternoon now. I'm so honored for the invitation. I would like to thank you, Sinesi, and the Center for inviting me to participate in this very important debate on the rights of the person with a disability. It is my pleasure and honor to also share our experience on the ratification. Mozambique, yes, as Clodoaldo was saying, we ratified internally the document, the instrument is binding although we still need to deposit the instrument at the African Union. I'm not going to stick much in that arena because it's just, in my point of view, important formal procedure for us to be now considered ratified document, and so that we can also be start counting for monitoring process. Yes, currently I'm the legal advisor to the Prime Minister. When we wait for ratification of the instrument, I was here already. So I leave the momentum of the preparation of the process of ratification, and afterwards the submission of the government document to the Parliament. It was very interesting because there were tabled two instruments. There was a African Protocol on Disability Rights and also African Protocol on Elderly People Rights. That the Protocol on Elderly People was placed a reserve, but the protocol on the African Protocol on the rights of persons with disability was not placed a reserve, which this is very important to me because it's very good political will in terms of continue to progressively realize the rights of people with disability. Goldwald was saying that, yeah, we need to move on internally because the instrument is there. I have already the resolution is here. It's in the public gazette already, which means that the resolution is now in force internally. And then we have the process. But build on what Goldwald was saying, what do we have to do? Because all these legal instruments, in reality, they need impact. They need to be felt with people who, with persons with disability. This is the reality. And the protocol brings a lot of rights. I will not debate on the importance of the protocol because we already had in the morning session that it's very important because it speaks to us. Coincidentally, before the ratification, we also had a baseline study on the situation of the rights of people with persons with disability in 2019 to 2019 to 2020. So at that moment, all those issues which were in the protocol, we already had them in that baseline study. So which gave once again reinforce the idea that the protocol is very important because it speaks to the African context. It's a contextualized instrument. And also, the protocol has very important merits, to my point of view, because it tackles the idea or the intersectionality in terms of rights of people with disability, which is very, very important. Just to highlight some few things which I think that it's important to mention, that although we did not yet deposit the instrument, but we are already working on the ground. There is some work being done on the ground. We have now a draft of a plan, a national plan on persons with disability, which is being updated because we had one which was 2010 and 2014. Now it's being updated. And of course, in these updates, we will be checking if the protocol is being also taken in consideration, which is very important. But what I would like to also highlight is the fact that there is a lot of work to be done from to the realization of rights. I think we should not much, we will do, as Kodwado will say, the civil society is working hard to pressurize the government to deposit the instrument. And personally, I will also, I've been also participating in that process. Will be then concluded, and I will continue also to see if we can be mentioned at the African Commission website that we are one of the countries which have ratified. But now, I think, in my point of view, we have to work hard and run fast to make sure that the rights of people with persons with disability are being respected in the ground. This is the expectation which we have to fulfill, all of us, not only the government, not only the civil society, all of us. We have to work hard, and here is the idea of coordination, which is being emphasized, because to realize or to make progress in the realization of rights of people with disability, we need to work hand in hand, all of us, to make sure that no one is lagging behind. In that note, I took some notes on the highlights, which personally I feel like we need to do something immediately or urgently, because I think that in terms of legal sphere, to protect people, persons with disability, we have a lot. Nationally, we have a lot of laws, plans of action, strategies, all that. And there is a draft now of national agenda for the rights of people with disability. And I think that national agenda is really very beautiful. One of the highlights which I would like to mention is Mozambique in the past years is being affected dramatically with climate change, and we've been having quite a number of cyclones, and people with disability, they tend to be affected excessively due to their vulnerability. They are more vulnerable because of the disability itself. Therefore, it's important that we have a plan which is very clear and tackle all these issues. First of all, I think it's very important that we have in the plan of action clear design plan on how persons with disability have access to information. Because I see all the situation which we can see after disaster in all the statistics, we find that normally it's access to information which is lacking, because access to information for people, for persons with disability, is much more demand. They need to be translated in Braille and in all other forms which are accessible to persons with disability. Another thing is that also with the security situation in Cabo Delgado, also because when people with disability, they tend to be vulnerable, and when we have a catastrophe or disaster, that increase the level of disability. So to make sure that all persons with disability in IDP camps, they should have access to all the rights and priority which they need in terms of access to health, in terms of access to education, and all other rights which are very important, because we tend to minimize, and they also tend to be lagging behind. But if you look at the plans in terms of how to tackle the situation in the north, where we have the conflicts, and we find that all the humanitarian laws are in place, and they are also national design plans and strategies, but normally they tend to be silent on specific how to tackle rights of specific groups. And also in terms of gender issues, which are not, they should not be silent in terms of being taken into consideration. So the protocol was ratified on in good time, in my point of view. The country took very huge step, and then of course they have to conclude it. But the instrument itself, if we look at it, it's a very important instrument, and we need to, for now on, take in consideration all what the protocol is also saying. And also another thing is that access to justice for persons with disability. In Mozambique, we have a presidential initiative where we now try to have in all districts one court. Very important initiative, but of course, I'm not sure if all the issue of the right of person of disability are being taken into consideration in terms of accessibility in general. So this instrument needs we need to strengthening our capacity for advocacy and lobbying in judiciary itself, and also for its implementation. Therefore, I think that although this access to justice is exactly very important to persons with disability, but also I think we have to look at timing. We are now preparing for elections, municipal elections, and also we need to make sure that the protocol is going to be respected in that time, because normally what happened that we tend to have a process which tends to exclude. Disability is situation which it's multifaceted, so it's not enough to just put places for wheelchairs, to put the ballot at the level of wheelchairs. But if you don't translate the bulletin of vote, you to braille and other way of other ways of. Are you still hearing me?
Yes.
So I think these steps and this planning in terms of we have a lot of work ahead, which have to involve the National Human Rights Commission, the civil society, and the government itself. They should, as I say, we have three important issues. at this moment, which for me is that the government took a very appropriate step to make sure that we ratify the document. Internally, it's a binding document, and we can implement it. It's a law like any other. We need to make sure that people with disability, which are provided in that instrument. In terms of future disasters, we need to prepare. There is now a draft document which was placed here in the government to access to information. But the proposed bill does not express much on the forms and ways of accessing the disaster and emergency information. And we need to go to that document and see the recommended comment and do lobby that people with disability are catered for. Another issue which I would also like to just also include in just my highlights, people with disability, they have social and economical empowerment right, but persons with disability in Mozambique, they qualify to have minimum. If we look at they don't bring any type of extra rights like affirmative actions or all other system which make them, although they have access to minimum flow protection, but the adequacy of that social protection minimum flow is questionable, and we need. That's why, in general, I think after the ratification of the instrument, we now have to go back to all the existing legislation, which is protects rights in an intersectional way to check if they fulfill the minimum standard or not. This is nothing we need to we need to go revise all the laws and all the plans to include persons with disability so that they can immediately start enjoying the realization of rights, since we say that the protocol is contextualizing. The protocol is closing the gaps which probably existed in the legislation. So we need to go back and still make sure that these gaps are being, or the barriers are being removed. This is what I would like to include, and also there is something of affordable vocational and very important. Although this is very important provision, because what happens in the access of health, normally people need to buy, for instance, supporting goods, wheelchairs, and all other goods related to health, or to make the people with disability much more comfortable. And they change products, they pay duty. And I think this is one of a huge barrier, needs to be removed as as urgent as possible. And for that, we need to go and revise the taxes and duty rights, because this makes really difficult life of persons with disability, because a wheelchair become unaffordable to all, especially those people who those persons who do not have who do not have income to meet that price. Senesio, I don't know if you still have questions for me, but I will probably stop here.
Okay, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. I like the fact that you highlighted the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement. I also like the fact that you briefly discussed the plight of vulnerable groups from an intersectional perspective. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Retta, who will be taking questions from the floor. Farida was our last speaker. So thank you, Farida, and thank you to all the other speakers for your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sinesio. We'll be taking now a few questions from the audience before we conclude this session. So we have now one question from Roderick, who is asking our panelist, what action would you suggest for strengthening the monitoring and support system at the local level for both the implementation of the SRPD and the protection of the rights of people with disability? I think this question was directed to Clement, mainly. Otherwise, I can ask D'Ignacio to provide some insights on this question, if possible.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I think, as was mentioned by the moderator, this question would have been best answered by Mr. Clement of the Pan-African Parliament, but I can say a couple of things. The first thing is, because of the ratification of the CRPD, the UN CRPD, which calls for the establishment of disability councils, for example, in member states, that offers an opportunity for the domestication as well as monitoring of disability rights. And the fact that we now have the Africa Disability Protocol, which also calls for such independent disability councils to be established in member states, would reinforce the already existing practices of having monitoring and independent disability councils. The other thing is the participation of persons with disabilities, which is highlighted, as I said in my presentation earlier, which is highlighted even more in the Africa Disability Protocol than it is in the CRPD. So having empowered persons with disabilities, having empowered organizations of persons with disabilities would, as a result, empower the monitoring of disability rights. So you have, for example, practices, already established practices of presenting shadow reports, parallel reports, when member states present their reports to the CRPD committee, to the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, for example. So if we don't have empowered and capacitated organizations of persons with disabilities, then we would have a limitation of such kinds of parallel reports, shadow reports, which would pinpoint the limitations of the state reports. And therefore, the issue of self-representation and ensuring that organizations of persons with disabilities run with an adequate capacity is relevant to ensure monitoring of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Daginasho, for your insights and your response. There is a question now from Owiro, who's raising his hand or her hand. You can proceed, please. Or you can ask your question on the chat and we'll be raising it over here. It seems like we don't have any more question. So I will be calling now Mr. Paul Juma, who is representing the Center for Human Rights, to give concluding remarks on the behalf of Ms. Diana Msipad, the director. The floor is yours, Mr. Paul.
Thank you very much, Farouk. I am Paul Juma, researcher with the Disability Rights Unit. I am here on behalf of Diana, who is the manager, Disability Rights Unit. The webinar is very important to the center and Africa as a whole. The aim is to get African states to ratify the African Disability Protocol. This is also one of the main agendas of the Disability Rights Unit. The other works of the Disability Rights Unit include providing technical support to stakeholders, capacity building, and awareness raising on the rights of persons with disability across Africa. The next event is the African Disability Rights Conference, which will be held in November. The call for papers for this event is also out. The Disability Rights Unit is also involved in academics. We have a master's program in disability rights in Africa. The call is also out. We also do publish articles in the African Disability Rights Journal. So if you feel like publishing, please feel free to check our website. So with those few remarks, I wish to thank the presenters for the wonderful and informative presentations. I also want to thank the participants for actively participating in the session today. I also want to thank the team members who made this event possible: Farouk, Eva, Henok, Olabisi, Jonas, and Mohammed. Thank you so much for the good work. Thank you also to the communication team for the technical assistance and the center leadership. Thank you so much, everyone. Back to you, Farouk.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your words, and we're also glad to have you with us. And from my end, I would like to thank, on behalf of our advocacy group, to thank all our speakers and our panelists for their time and for their insights and their information sharing that will be helpful for our attendees and also for people who will be watching us afterwards. And this was a good opportunity to recall the states to ratify the African Protocol and also encourage civil society and organization and also all actors involved in this process to speed up the ratification and encourage all actors to join effort in that regard. And we hope the session was insight was an insightful for you all, and we hope that this opportunity will we'll be having more opportunities in the future, and we'll be having a session when the protocol will be having 15 ratified states, which means that the protocol will enter into force, and then we'll be having more discussion about how we'll implement the protocol and which will be the future or the next steps in that regard. So we hope this was a good step toward achieving this, and we thank you all once again, and thank you so much. And have a good day.